Every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m., an old man opened his front door to the same gentle knock. He lived alone in a small, aging house on a quiet street where most neighbors barely knew his name. His mornings were usually silent, no family voices, no rushing footsteps, just the ticking of a wall clock and memories that grew louder with age. But one thing never changed. Standing on the porch each morning was a tall man wearing a simple jacket and a cap pulled low over his eyes. In his hands was a warm paper bag and a coffee cup. "Good morning," the man would say calmly. "I brought you breakfast." The old man smiled every time. "You didn't have to," he'd reply. "I wanted to," the man answered, always the same words. The old man never asked his name. He didn't want to seem rude. He simply thought of him as a kind stranger who cared enough to show up when the world had mostly moved on. The man stayed only a few minutes each day. Sometimes they talked about the weather. Sometimes about life. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Silence, when shared, felt comforting. What the old man didn't know was that the man bringing him breakfast was Seagal. No cameras. No security. No fame. Just a human being showing up for another. In a world obsessed with recognition, real kindness often happens where no one is watching. The most meaningful acts don't need applause, they just need consistency. To the old man, those breakfasts weren't about food. They were proof that someone remembered him. That someone thought he still mattered. One morning, as Stephen handed over the bag, the old man laughed softly and said, "You're more reliable than the sunrise." Stephen smiled, nodded, and walked away as usual. But the next morning, 7:15 came and went. No knock. The old man waited. 7:30. 7:45. Still nothing. A strange worry crept into his chest. He told himself not to overthink it. Maybe the man was sick. Maybe he was busy. Then, suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the house. Not gentle. Not familiar. The old man slowly made his way to the door. When he opened it, his breath caught. Standing on his porch were uniformed military officers. And the first words they spoke changed everything. "What do you think is about to happen next? And be honest, do you believe small daily kindness can truly change someone's life? Comment your thoughts below." The military officers stood quietly on the porch, their posture straight, their expressions serious. For a moment, the old man thought he had done something wrong. "I'm sorry," he said nervously. Is there a problem?" One of the officers softened his tone. "No, sir. We just need to ask you a few questions." The old man's heart raced. His eyes drifted past them, half expecting to see Stephen standing nearby, smiling like always, holding a paper bag and coffee. But Stephen wasn't there. They stepped inside politely. The house was modest, old furniture, faded photographs, and a faint smell of coffee that still lingered from yesterday morning. "How long have you known Stephen?" one officer asked. The old man paused. "I don't even know his last name," he admitted. "He's been bringing me breakfast every morning for months." The officers exchanged a quick glance. Sometimes the deepest relationships are built without titles, labels, or even names, just presence. The old man continued, his voice steadier now. "He never talked about himself much. He just listened. That meant more to me than he probably realized." One officer nodded slowly. "That sounds like him." The old man frowned. Is he all right?" Before they could answer, the old man's mind drifted back to how it all began. It was a cold morning when Stephen first knocked. The old man had barely opened the door before apologizing for the mess inside. Stephen had laughed softly and said, "I'm not here to judge your house. I'm here to share a meal." From that day on, breakfast became a ritual. Stephen remembered how the old man liked his coffee. 2 sugars, no cream. He brought different foods just to see which ones made him smile. Sometimes pancakes. Sometimes fruit. Sometimes nothing fancy at all. They talked about life. The old man shared stories of long days, hard work, and people he'd lost over the years. Stephen never rushed him. Never checked his phone. Never looked bored. For many elderly people, loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about feeling forgotten. Back in the present, the old man looked at the officers again. You still haven't told me why you're here. One of them took a breath. Stephen asked us to check on you this morning. The old man blinked. Check on me? Yes, the officer said. Because he couldn't come himself. A wave of concern washed over him. Is he hurt? The officer hesitated, just long enough to raise fear. He's fine, he said quickly. But there are things about Stephen you don't know. The room felt suddenly smaller. The old man sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the chair. I only know he's a good man. The officers nodded in agreement. Sometimes kindness is a language spoken by those who carry heavy pasts quietly. One officer glanced at a photo frame on the shelf, an old black-and-white picture of the old man in uniform from decades ago. You served, the officer said. The old man looked surprised. Yes. A long time ago. The officer smiled faintly. Stephen never forgets people who served. The words hung in the air. Do you think listening can be more powerful than helping with money? And tell us, which country or city are you watching from? The old man swallowed hard. So, where is Stephen right now? The officers stood. You'll see him soon, one said. But first, you deserve to know why he chose you. And with that, the truth was finally beginning to surface. The old man sat quietly as the officers remained standing, their presence calm but heavy with meaning. His fingers trembled slightly as he rested his hands on his knees. You said Stephen chose me, he said softly. But I don't understand why. One of the officers stepped closer to the window, glancing outside as if choosing the right words. Stephen doesn't choose people randomly, he said. He notices things most people walk past. The old man let out a slow breath. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the officer asked, Do you remember the first time you told him about your wife? The old man's eyes widened slightly. Yes, he said. I told him she used to make breakfast every morning, even when we had nothing. His voice cracked. She passed away years ago, he continued. After that, mornings became the hardest. Grief doesn't disappear with time, it just learns to sit quietly beside us. Stephen had never tried to fix that pain. He never said, everything happens for a reason. He just showed up the next morning. And the next. And the next. The old man wiped his eyes. He never interrupted me. He just listened. One officer nodded. That's because Stephen understands loss. The old man looked up sharply. Loss. Yes, the officer replied. Stephen has spent years working with veterans, widows, and people the world has forgotten. He doesn't talk about it. He believes service doesn't end when the uniform comes off. The old man leaned back slowly, absorbing the words. So he wasn't just being kind, he whispered. He was honoring something. The officer nodded. You served, he said gently. You gave years of your life to protect people who never knew your name. Stephen saw that. The room fell silent again. Some people don't want recognition for their sacrifices, but recognition still matters. The old man stared at the floor. All those years, he murmured. I thought no one remembered. The officer's voice softened. Stephen remembered. The old man's chest tightened. His mind drifted back to one morning not long ago. He had told Stephen, almost jokingly, Most days, you're the only person I talk to. Stephen had paused, then replied, Then I'll make sure you're never unheard. At the time, the old man thought it was just a kind sentence. Now, it felt like a promise. Do you think being present for someone is more powerful than giving advice? Why or why not? Share your thoughts below, backhand index pointing down. One of the officers reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. Stephen asked us to give you this today. The old man hesitated before taking it. Inside was a handwritten note. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your strength. And thank you for letting me share breakfast with you. The old man's hands shook as he read it. He thanked me, he whispered. But I didn't do anything special. The officer smiled faintly. That's exactly why he respects you. The most honorable people rarely recognize their own worth. Tears rolled freely now. The old man didn't bother hiding them. "I thought my life was over," he said quietly. "After my wife died, after the phone stopped ringing, I thought I was invisible." The officers didn't interrupt. "But then," he continued, "a stranger knocked on my door every morning like I still mattered." His voice broke completely. "That saved me more than he'll ever know." The room felt heavy with emotion. One officer cleared his throat. "There's one more thing you should know." The old man looked up. "Stephen didn't just bring you breakfast," he said. "He rearranged his schedule every morning to be here. No press. No cameras. He didn't want anyone to know." "Why?" the old man asked. "Because he believes kindness loses its meaning when it's performed for applause. True compassion doesn't need witnesses." The old man nodded slowly. Then he asked the question that had been building in his chest. "So why didn't he come today?" The officers exchanged another glance. "Because today," one said carefully, "was meant to be different." The old man's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" The officer straightened his uniform. "Today isn't about breakfast," he said. "It's about recognition." The old man stood up slowly, confused and overwhelmed. "Recognition for what?" The officer met his eyes. "For a life quietly lived with dignity." There was a knock at the door again. This time, gentle, familiar. The old man turned, his breath caught in his throat. On the other side of the door was Steven Seagal. But he wasn't alone. "What do you think is about to happen next? Do you believe quiet lives deserve public honor? Comment your opinion below." The knock was unmistakable. Soft. Familiar. Gentle. The old man's breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned toward the door. His heart pounded, not from fear this time, but from something far heavier. Hope. One of the officers nodded. "You should answer," he said quietly. The old man took a step forward. Then another. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. When he opened the door, there he was. Steven Seagal stood on the porch, dressed simply as always, but today he wasn't alone. Behind him stood several uniformed military officers, their posture straight, their faces solemn. A small group of neighbors had gathered at the end of the street, whispering, watching, sensing something important was happening. The old man couldn't speak. Steven broke the silence. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope you'll forgive me for being late." The old man swallowed hard. "You didn't come," he finally said. "I thought something happened to you." Steven stepped closer. "Something did," he replied. "But not to me." Sometimes, the most important moments in life don't come quietly. They arrive carrying the weight of everything we tried to forget. Steven gestured toward the officers. "May we come inside?" The old man nodded, still stunned. Once everyone was inside, Steven turned to face him fully. There was no celebrity confidence in his posture. Just humility. Respect. "I want you to know," Steven said, "that every breakfast we shared meant as much to me as it did to you." The old man shook his head. "You gave me more than you know." Steven smiled gently. "And today, I want to give you something back." One of the officers stepped forward holding a framed case. Inside was a carefully preserved medal, polished to a soft shine. The old man's eyes widened. "I haven't seen that in decades," he whispered. The officer spoke clearly. "This medal was awarded for your service. Records show it was never formally presented." The room went silent. History doesn't always forget people on purpose. Sometimes, it just never circles back unless someone insists it does. Steven looked at the old man. "When you told me your stories," he said, "I realized something was missing. Not from your life, but from how it ended." The old man's knees weakened. He sat down slowly. "All those years," he said, "I thought it didn't matter anymore." Steven knelt slightly in front of him. "It always mattered." One officer cleared his throat. "Today, we're here to formally recognize your service and your sacrifice." The neighbors outside fell silent as the door remained open. Phones were raised. But Steven didn't look at them. This moment wasn't for the world. It was for one man. The officer carefully presented the medal. "Thank you for serving with honor." The old man reached out with shaking hands and accepted it. Tears streamed freely now. "I didn't think anyone remembered," he said. Stephen placed a hand on his shoulder. "I remembered. And I wanted to make sure the world did too." Recognition isn't about praise, it's about restoring dignity. Do you think society waits too long to honor people who sacrificed quietly? Why do you think that happens? The old man looked down at the medal, then back up at Stephen. "All this time," he said softly, "you were doing so much, and you never said a word." Stephen exhaled slowly. "Because this was never about me." Outside, one of the neighbors finally spoke aloud. "That's Steven Seagal." Whispers spread quickly now. The truth traveled fast. But inside the house, no one moved. Stephen stood up. "I didn't want attention," he said calmly. "I just wanted you to feel what you deserved to feel long ago." The old man nodded, overwhelmed. "You gave me mornings," he said. "You gave me purpose again." Stephen smiled. "And you reminded me why service never ends. Sometimes, helping someone else heals parts of us we didn't know were broken." One of the officers glanced at Stephen. "There's just one more thing." He turned to the old man. "There are people outside who want to thank you too." The old man hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Stephen leaned closer and said quietly, "You faced far worse in your life than being seen." The old man took a deep breath. Then, slowly, he stood up. They stepped onto the porch together. The neighbors began to clap. Not loudly, not dramatically, but respectfully. The old man held the medal close to his chest, tears in his eyes, standing taller than he had in years. Stephen stood slightly behind him, not in front. Exactly where he wanted to be. How do you think this moment will change the old man's life forever? And do you believe everyone deserves recognition before it's too late? Comment your thoughts below. The applause didn't stop when the old man stepped onto the porch. It grew. Neighbors who had barely exchanged greetings with him before now stood quietly, clapping with respect. Some placed their hands over their hearts. Others wiped their eyes, unsure why they felt so emotional, but certain that this moment mattered. The old man looked overwhelmed. He wasn't used to being seen. Stephen remained just behind him, hands folded, eyes lowered, not hiding, but intentionally stepping out of the spotlight. Some people don't want attention for themselves. They want justice for others. A local reporter who had been passing through the neighborhood stopped when she saw the uniforms and the crowd. She raised her camera cautiously, unsure if she was witnessing a ceremony or something far more personal. "What's going on?" someone whispered. A neighbor answered quietly. "That man served his country, and no one ever thanked him." The words spread like electricity. Within minutes, more people gathered. Cars slowed. Phones were lifted, not for gossip, but for remembrance. The old man held the medal tightly in his hand. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling. One of the officers stepped forward. "You don't have to say anything, sir. Today is about honoring your life." Stephen finally spoke to the crowd. "This man never asked for recognition," he said calmly. "He never complained. He just lived with dignity. That deserves respect." True humility isn't silence, it's strength without demand. A woman in the crowd spoke up. "My father served too," she said. "He passed away before anyone ever thanked him." Her voice broke. Another man added, "We forget people like this, until it's too late." The old man looked out at the faces before him, young, old, strangers, neighbors, and felt something unfamiliar settle into his chest. Belonging. Do you think people are appreciated enough while they're still alive? Or do we wait until it's too late? The reporter finally asked, "Why did you do this?" She looked directly at Stephen. Stephen paused. "Because kindness shouldn't wait," he said. "And gratitude shouldn't be delayed by bureaucracy or time." The clip was uploaded that same afternoon. By evening, it had millions of views. Headlines spread fast. Steven Seagal honors forgotten veteran after months of quiet kindness. Breakfast visits turn into a moment the internet can't stop watching. But the old man didn't see any of that yet. He was sitting back inside his home, the medal resting carefully on the table in front of him, staring at it as if it might disappear. "I thought my life was done," he said quietly to Steven. "I didn't think anything new was coming." Steven sat across from him. "Life doesn't end when the noise stops," he said. "Sometimes, that's when it finally speaks. Purpose doesn't retire. Meaning doesn't expire." The old man nodded slowly. "You know," he said, "when you started bringing breakfast, I thought it was just food." Steven smiled. "It never was." Outside, officers prepared to leave. One turned back and saluted the old man one final time. "Thank you for your service," he said. The old man returned the salute, slowly, carefully, but proudly. For the first time in years, his back was straight. What does respect mean to you? Words, actions, or consistency? That night, messages poured in from across the country. Veterans, families, strangers. Some thanked the old man. Some thanked Steven. Most thanked the reminder. The old man didn't read them all. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the streetlights come on, holding on to something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Steven stood to leave. "I'll see you tomorrow morning," he said. The old man smiled. "You don't have to bring breakfast." Steven chuckled softly. "I know. But I want to." Kindness that's chosen, not obligated, is the most powerful kind. As Steven stepped outside, he paused. The crowd had mostly gone, but the impact remained. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something new. Because when one quiet life is honored publicly, it reminds everyone else that no life is small. How do you think this moment will change the old man's remaining years? And do you believe kindness can rewrite someone's future? Comment your thoughts below. The next morning, the sun rose over the quiet neighborhood, bathing the small house in soft golden light. But something had changed. It wasn't the old walls, the chipped paint, or even the familiar sounds of birds chirping. It was the energy surrounding the house. Neighbors peeked from windows. Some walked slowly past, waving respectfully. Others lingered on the sidewalks, unsure if they should approach. Rumors had spread overnight. The video of Steven Seagal honoring the old man had gone viral. News outlets had covered it. Social media exploded with comments, shares, and messages of admiration. Inside, the old man sat at the kitchen table, staring at the medal. For the first time in decades, it wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol, a reminder that he had mattered, that his life had purpose, and that someone had remembered when others had forgotten. Steven entered quietly, carrying a simple paper bag of breakfast as he always did. No cameras. No fanfare. Just him. "Morning," Steven said softly. The old man smiled. "You didn't have to come today." "I know," Steven replied. "But I wanted to." Some routines are too important to stop. True kindness doesn't chase attention. It keeps showing up, quietly, faithfully, until it changes someone's world. The old man took a deep breath. "You know, after yesterday, I didn't expect anyone to care." Steven shook his head. "You forget. People do care. You just haven't always seen it. Some things take time to reach us." Outside, the officers returned, not to honor him again, but to witness the after-effects of what had happened. They watched as neighbors approached the old man's door, shaking hands, sharing hugs, leaving flowers, or just nodding quietly in acknowledgement. It was humbling, and it was overwhelming. "Look at this," one officer said. "You've inspired so many people already. Do you realize that?" The old man shook his head. "I never thought I'd see anything like this in my life. I just lived it, day by day." Steven nodded. And sometimes, living quietly with dignity is enough to inspire the world. The old man thought back to the mornings before Steven had come. The loneliness. The silence. The small, gnawing feeling that life had forgotten him. Now, thanks to this one man, the world seemed bigger, kinder, and more compassionate than he had imagined. Kindness has a ripple effect. One act can spread far beyond the walls where it began. As the day went on, messages from strangers poured in, emails, social media comments, letters, even calls. Some were simple, "Thank you for your service." Others were stories of people inspired to check on their own elderly neighbors or reach out to someone lonely. The old man read a few aloud to Stephen. "Look at this one," he said, voice trembling. "Someone is flying in from another state just to say hello." Stephen smiled gently. That's the thing about kindness. It grows when it's shared. And it always comes back in unexpected ways. Suddenly, a local reporter knocked on the door again, this time to interview the old man personally. He was nervous but agreed. As the camera rolled, he realized he had something to say, not just about himself, but about what the moment meant. "I've learned something," he said, voice steady. "That even when life feels quiet and unseen, the smallest acts of attention can change everything. You don't have to be famous, or powerful, or rich. You just have to care. And care consistently." Stephen, standing silently beside him, nodded. The officers stayed a few more minutes, then left quietly, saluting the old man one last time. He returned the gesture. Not out of formality, but because it felt like honoring the journey that had brought him here. Recognition isn't just about medals or praise. It's about showing that someone's life has value. And when that happens, it can inspire countless others to live more consciously, more kindly. By evening, the neighborhood was transformed. People spoke differently. Strangers smiled. Even children waved at the old man as they passed. There was a renewed sense of connection, a quiet understanding that every life is meaningful. The old man looked at the medal again. He had survived loss, loneliness, and the feeling of being invisible. And now, he realized something he hadn't in decades. Being seen, being remembered, being appreciated, it mattered more than anything he had accomplished alone. Stephen placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than you know. And the world needed to see it." The old man's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought my quiet life would mean so much to anyone." Stephen smiled softly. "That's the thing. You never know who's watching, or who will be touched by what you do quietly every day. Do you believe quiet, consistent kindness is more powerful than dramatic, attention-seeking actions? And have you ever experienced someone quietly changing your life? Share your story in the comments below, backhand index pointing down. The old man held the medal close to his chest. He felt proud, but not in a boastful way. He felt grateful, for Stephen, for the officers, for neighbors, and for the chance to finally know that his life had mattered. Outside, the sun began to set. The golden light reflected off the medal. And in that glow, the old man realized the world could still be a place of beauty and recognition, even after years of feeling forgotten. He smiled. And for the first time in decades, he looked forward to tomorrow. Not for the routine, not for the breakfast, but for the quiet hope that every new day could bring connection, respect, and kindness. Some acts are small, like a paper bag of breakfast. Some are quiet, like listening. But together, they have the power to create a wave of change, reaching far beyond what we can see. And sometimes, one person's decision to care is enough to transform an entire community. The morning after the ceremony, the neighborhood felt different. Birds chirped as usual, the sun rose in its predictable arc, and the streets were quiet, but there was a subtle energy in the air. People walked slower. Smiles lingered longer. A sense of awareness had settled into the community, like a gentle reminder that every life matters. Inside the small house, the old man sat at his kitchen table, staring at the medal he had been presented the day before. It gleamed softly in the morning light, a tangible symbol of acknowledgement, but more importantly, of dignity restored. Stephen Seagal entered quietly, as he always did, carrying a simple paper bag with breakfast. He placed it on the table and nodded. "Morning," he said, his voice calm, familiar. "Morning," the old man replied. A small smile touched his lips. For a moment, they sat in silence, savoring the quiet connection that had grown over months of simple breakfasts and shared stories. This wasn't about fame or media attention or recognition. It was about human connection, trust, and respect. True legacy is not measured by wealth or accolades. It's measured by the lives we touch, the moments we show up, and the quiet acts of care we perform consistently. By that afternoon, the video of the old man receiving recognition from Steven Seagal and the military officers had gone viral. Millions of people across the globe watched in awe. Comments poured in from every continent. Veterans, families, young people, strangers, all inspired by a simple story of daily kindness amplified by recognition. News outlets ran headlines. Steven Seagal honors forgotten veteran, a lesson in humanity. Small acts of kindness go viral as local hero is recognized. The old man didn't understand much about social media, but he could feel it. People were reaching out. Some sent letters. Others delivered small gifts. Messages arrived from other veterans who had felt invisible, telling him that this recognition had restored their faith in the world. The ripple effect was undeniable. When we honor someone quietly, it can inspire thousands more. One act of compassion grows into a movement. Steven, noticing the old man's awe and confusion, said softly, "The story doesn't end with recognition. It continues in every life that is inspired by your journey." The old man looked down at the medal again, his hands trembling. "I never expected this," he said. "Neither did I," Steven replied. "But it's proof that living quietly, with dignity and respect, can change the world in ways you may never see directly." Outside, neighbors stopped by not for media attention, but for connection. They brought coffee, shared stories, and even invited him to community gatherings. The old man realized he was no longer invisible. His life, once quiet and overlooked, had become a beacon of hope for others. One officer returned one morning, nodding respectfully. "You've inspired countless people," he said. The old man smiled faintly. "I just lived my life." Steven put a hand on his shoulder. "Exactly. And that's why this matters so much. Ordinary lives, lived with care, have extraordinary impact. Do you believe small, consistent acts of kindness can truly change someone's life? And who in your life deserves to be acknowledged today? Comment below, backhand index pointing down. That evening, as the sun began to set, the old man reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about loneliness, the passing of his wife, and decades of feeling forgotten. And now, he realized that every act of care, no matter how small, had built a bridge, not just between him and Steven, but between him and the world. He remembered each breakfast, each conversation, each moment of patience and listening. What had seemed ordinary at the time had created something extraordinary. Legacy isn't always about grand gestures. It's the quiet, steady presence, the consistency of care, and the humility in every interaction that truly endures. The old man stood by the window, looking at the neighborhood bathed in golden light. Children played outside, neighbors waved, and even passers-by stopped briefly to nod in recognition. He realized that one person's decision to care quietly had touched not just his life, but the lives of countless others. Steven stood beside him, looking out the same window. "Tomorrow, we continue," he said. "Continue?" the old man asked. Steven smiled. "Yes. Not for attention. Not for recognition. But because kindness never stops, and there are always lives that need to feel remembered." The old man nodded, tears forming in his eyes. For the first time in decades, he felt a full sense of peace. He understood that life had given him one final lesson. It is never too late to be seen, to be heard, and to inspire others. And as the evening faded into night, one thought remained clear in his mind. Every small act of love and care matters. Every quiet moment can create ripples that reach farther than we ever imagine. If this story moved you, think about the people in your life who may feel forgotten. Who could you show kindness to today? Type respect in the comments if you believe small, quiet acts of care can change the world, and subscribe for more stories that inspire humanity. The old man placed the medal on the table, a symbol of recognition, a reminder of hope, and proof that life, no matter how quiet, can leave a lasting, meaningful legacy. The real heroes aren't always in the spotlight. Sometimes, they are the ones who quietly show up, day after day, listening, caring, and reminding the world that dignity and kindness are never forgotten. And that is the legacy of quiet courage, compassion, and the extraordinary power of small acts done with a full heart.